All right, so you're performing RDLs and you find that you're not hitting your hamstrings, your lower back's getting blown up, you're bending your knees too much. This video is for you. I'm gonna show you 3 different ways to make your RDL better and kind of remedy some of these things that might be taking away from your gains. Let's start with the first method. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is use a reference to control our range of motion. So this is gonna be really useful for lifters who find that they're going too deep with their range of motion to where they're actually taking away some of that load and tension on the hamstrings, glutes, posterior muscles. And so what this is gonna do is it's going to allow us to be a lot more specific with the range that we feel comfortable working through. And so for beginners, I often have them start a little bit shallower and then I'll have them get deeper as they feel more comfortable. But obviously with a good RDL, we want a really strong hip hinge. And so using a wall reference like this rack here, we can use this to hinge back and tap, and then that's when we know when to come back up. So for most beginners, I would say start about a foot length or about a 1.5 foot length away. So I'm gonna do a 1.5 foot length because I obviously have a little bit more experience with it. So on the tip of my toe here, I'm then gonna establish my stance, pick up this weight as I normally would, and I'm gonna focus on controlling my hinge, controlling my hinge, controlling my hinge. And then once I feel that rack, that is when I'm gonna stand back up. And so essentially what that's going to do is it's gonna allow me to feel a constraint to focus on my hinge, keep tension into my hamstrings, and avoid going too far to where I might be putting more stress into my lower back. Then as you get more comfortable, you can go a couple inches out, great. Focus on my hinge, focus on my hinge, focus on my hinge. And then once I feel that, that's probably at my peak range of motion. I'm gonna come back up, do the same thing, focus on that reference point, keeping that really strong hinge angle, and then come back up. What I would say is that generally speaking, anything below 2 foot lengths off of that reference point will be good for most folks. If you're too far away, you might find that you just end up playing that game of how far can I reach? And then you're actually taking away from what we're trying to do. But I would say start again, 1.5 foot length, go from there, feel this out. And then if you're more of a beginner, you can start shallower. And then as you get more comfortable, focus on hinging more, because even an inch of difference makes a vast difference in your hinge range of motion. So the next method I want to discuss on cleaning up your RDL is for anybody who finds that they're flexing their knees too much. And even though you watch yourself and you video yourself, you still find that you're flexing too much and taking away stress and tension from the hamstrings and posterior muscles. So something you can do is use another reference point, but instead of behind the body, working to have our hinge or our posterior hit that, putting a reference point in front of the body. So one of my favorite setups, and this will vary for your case because not everybody will have the same J-hook and rack setup with the band. So if you don't, you can use a bench here. So think about whatever you could put in front of the legs that will work for your needs. The only thing and reason I don't love the bench is because sometimes it could be a little bit too long and you can bump it. Similar to this context too with some J-hooks and racks. So definitely play around with your setup. But the big thing here is we're gonna set up like we normally would with our RDL. So we're gonna come up and let our knees just lightly touch this band. So let me go ahead and pick up our RDL here. And then as we're hinging, the big thing we want to focus on is as we're working through that range of motion, we want these knees to keep in contact with this band, but we don't want that band to get shoved forward. So if we're coming down and hinging and we look down and that band is getting pushed forward out of its line of tension, we know we're doing too much with our knees. So that's why I like having some soft tension to begin with on the band, because you will always have some knee flexion as you hinge to some degree if you're not doing a stiff leg variation. And so having that nice light tension is a good cueing mechanism to help you kind of mentally think, okay, I feel that band nice and light, hinge, 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 hinge. Cool, I'm at my in range of motion, stand back up. Then if you're ever hinging and you're like, okay, I'm getting tired, well, I'm feeling that band a lot more. Oh, I'm flexing my knees too much. Stand back up, restart, light tension, light tension, light tension. At that end range of motion, stand back up. And that will often, what you'll feel, I think, as you do these, is that you'll almost feel like you're getting pulled forward a little bit more. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That can actually be a better thing for helping you really leverage the hamstrings and posterior muscles to get the most out of your RDL. All right, so the final method, and this is actually one of my favorite variations in general with the RDL, let's call it the final boss of this video, is attaching a band to an anchored point like this rack here and allowing that to pull you into a deeper hinge position. So this is not only great to help train us to work through a deeper range of motion with our hinge and to focus on keeping tension through the hamstrings and posterior muscles, but it can also be great because when we're doing an RDL, we're keeping a lot of tension on these hamstrings, but as we stand back up, we don't really have a lot of resistance on the glutes. So there's not a lot of resistance directly on them when it comes to our hip extension. This band is great because this tension is going to be actively pulling against us as we extend. So now we're getting that awesome benefit from the barbell tension on the hamstrings and the band on the glutes. So how you're gonna set this up is you're gonna step in, and ideally, before you do this, because I have set this up incorrectly many a times on myself when I'm rushing through, is just go into a practice hinge, look behind you, and you ideally want this to be pulling in a more parallel angle with the ground. So right now it's a little bit low, so I'd probably bring that up just a smidge. If it's off a little bit, it's okay. I say like anywhere from like 10 to 20 degrees of variation of it being a little bit high or a little bit low, it's likely fine. So ideally what we want to do is then take our normal setup. When you are setting up with this, I like to think about having a little bit of a forward lean. You don't want to be leaning so far like this to resist the band. That's kind of counterproductive and you look kind of silly doing it. So just enough tension here to where you have a little bit of a forward lean. It's not going to take away from your overall mechanics in your RDL. That's usually the sweet spot. So stand up, and then also as you stand up, if you're like, oh wait, actually this feels really light, you always can take a step forward. But what we're gonna do from here is hinge, 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 hinge like we normally would. Let that band pull us back. Once we hit that end range, stand back up, drive through that band. And again, this gives us an awesome opportunity to not only keep a lot of this tension on the hamstrings, but as we're going through that concentric or standing up portion of this movement, we get a lot of awesome resistance on the glutes. So again, for beginners who are watching this, or even intermediates who are just trying to clean up their RDL, this can be a great variation to not only teach and help you work through a more productive range of motion, feel your hamstrings more, feel those posterior muscles more, but it can also be an awesome advanced variation to get more out of your RDL and get more for your glutes when it comes to working through that hip extension. If you have any additional questions on this video, I'm just gonna keep it here, get some nice gains as I talk through this. Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you like this one, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.